The thunderous chant of Ali, Ali, Ali still echoed through Caesar's palace, but I could see it in his eyes. Those once dancing eyes that had mocked me across 3 brutal fights now stared blankly at the canvas. I'd been waiting years to see Muhammad Ali humbled, but not like this. Never like this. Never. The greatest boxer who ever lived had just been systematically dismantled by Larry Holmes for 10 excruciating rounds, and I, Joe Frazier, his most bitter rival, found myself pushing through security to reach him. What happened next changed boxing forever, but the true story has never been told. Until today. Before I continue, if you're watching on your television or phone, subscribe to the channel and leave a comment telling me where you're watching my videos from. I want to know how far they're reaching. Thank you. I still remember the date, October 2nd, 1980. The boxing world called it the last hurrah. We all knew Ali was past his prime at 38 years old. He'd gained weight, slurred his words occasionally, and his legendary speed had diminished. But he was still Muhammad Ali, the 3-time heavyweight champion who had shook up the world more times than anyone could count. Nobody, especially me, was prepared for what we witnessed that night in Las Vegas. Larry Holmes, Ali's former sparring partner, didn't just beat the champion, he dissected him with surgical precision for 10 straight rounds. Each jab reorganized what was left of Ali's once impenetrable defense. Each right hand erased another chapter of his legacy. By the 8th round, I couldn't watch anymore. I'd hated this man for years, traded insults and punches with him in 3 of boxing's most brutal contests, yet I found myself praying for the referee to stop it. When Angelo Dundee finally threw in the towel after the 10th round, the entire arena fell silent in collective shock. Muhammad Ali, the Louisville Lip, the greatest of all time, had been thoroughly beaten for the first time in his illustrious career. What the cameras didn't show, what the boxing historians don't know, is what happened next. I pushed my way ringside as Holmes celebrated his victory with uncharacteristic restraint. The new champion knew what we all knew. He hadn't just beaten a man, he'd participated in the public execution of a legend. I locked eyes with Holmes momentarily. There was no joy in his face, only the grim satisfaction of a job clinically completed. "Take care of him," he mouthed to me before being whisked away by his entourage. It was the strangest moment of sportsmanship I'd ever witnessed. A champion deferring his moment of glory out of respect for the fallen king. The untold boxing story begins in Ali's corner. The medical team swarmed him, but Ali waved them away with what little strength he had left. His longtime trainer, Angelo Dundee, was sobbing openly, something I'd never seen in all my years in the fight game. Ali's entourage formed a protective circle around their fallen leader, but when he saw me approaching, he whispered something to Bundini Brown. The crowd parted, and suddenly I was face to face with Muhammad Ali. Up close, the damage was worse than I imagined. His face, once the most recognizable in sports, was swollen beyond recognition. His legendary boxing reflexes had abandoned him hours ago. The harsh ring lights revealed a truth no boxing fan wanted to acknowledge. The greatest was mortal after all. "Smoke," he whispered, using the nickname he'd given me years ago. "You came to gloat?" His voice was barely audible over the chaotic arena sounds, but I heard every word. The truth about the Ali Holmes fight wasn't just in the punches thrown, but in what happened next. I'd rehearsed this moment countless times in my mind over our decade-long rivalry. All the cutting remarks about my intelligence, my appearance, the guerrilla taunts, the manila threats, they'd built a reservoir of resentment I thought would never run dry. Yet standing there, seeing boxing's perfect specimen reduced to this vulnerable state, I felt nothing but respect for the man who had pushed me to greatness. "No, champ," I replied, kneeling beside him. "I came to help you back to the dressing room." What happened next stunned the few witnesses close enough to see it. Muhammad Ali, the man who had tormented me publicly for years, reached for my hand. As our fingers interlocked, a decade of animosity dissolved in an instant. The boxing rivalry that had defined both our careers was transcended by something more profound, the unspoken brotherhood of fighters. Our eyes met, and in that moment, we weren't Ali and Frazier. We were just 2 warriors who had sacrificed everything for the same dream. The journey from the ring to the dressing room revealed the hidden toll of boxing legends. Ali's legs betrayed him with each step. His massive frame leaned heavily against mine as we navigated the tunnel, away from the stunned crowd. The historic boxing match had ended, but its consequences were just beginning to unfold. Halfway down the corridor, Ali stopped suddenly. His breathing became labored, and for a terrifying moment, I thought he might collapse. "Joe," he whispered. They don't know. They can't ever know. I didn't understand what he meant then. It would be years before the world learned the truth, that Ali had already been experiencing symptoms of Parkinson's syndrome, that his slurred speech wasn't just fatigue, that his diminished reflexes weren't just age. He had entered the ring that night already a wounded lion. The dressing room door closed behind us, sealing off the outside world and its judgments. Only his closest confidants remained. Angelo Dundee, Bundini Brown, his doctor Ferdy Pacheco, and now improbably, me. What I witnessed in those private moments was a side of Muhammad Ali the public never saw. The bravado vanished. The poems and predictions disappeared. Sitting heavily on the training table, he looked at his trembling hands with confusion, as though they belonged to someone else. This ain't right, he mumbled repeatedly. This ain't how it's supposed to end. Doctor. Pacheco examined him quietly in the corner, his expression growing increasingly grave. I later learned he had been urging Ali to retire for years, warning of neurological damage that would only worsen with each fight. What really happened after the Holmes fight was a confrontation that would change the course of boxing history. Angelo Dundee, the tactical genius who had guided Ali through his greatest victories, approached his fighter with tears streaming down his weathered face. That's it, champ, he said firmly. No more, we're done. For the first time in their long partnership, Ali didn't argue. He simply nodded, a gesture so small yet so monumental that everyone in the room understood its significance. The greatest boxing career of all time had ended not with a victorious roar, but with a quiet surrender to reality. As the doctor continued his examination, Ali motioned for me to come closer. Smoke, he whispered, his voice temporarily finding its familiar rhythm. We made magic, didn't we? In that moment, I understood what few boxing fans ever could, that our rivalry had never been about hatred. It had been about pushing each other to heights neither could have reached alone. The best magic in boxing history, I replied truthfully. A faint smile crossed his battered face. Thrilla in Manila, he said, referencing our third and most brutal encounter. Closest to death I ever been until tonight. The honesty stunned me. For years he had maintained he was never hurt in our fights, that I had never touched him in ways that mattered. Now, in the vulnerability of defeat, the truth emerged. The untold story took an unexpected turn when Howard Cosell entered the dressing room. The famous sportscaster who had chronicled Ali's career from its beginning had been conspicuously silent during the later rounds of the Holmes massacre. The two had shared an unusual friendship. Cosell, the intellectual commentator, Ali, the poetic pugilist. They had elevated each other in the public's imagination. Seeing Ali in his diminished state, Cosell removed his famous toupee in a gesture of raw humanity that shocked everyone present. Muhammad, he said, his voice cracking, this never should have happened. Ali looked up at his longtime media foil and responded with unexpected clarity. You told me to quit 2 years ago, Howard. Should have listened. The admission hung in the air like a final bell. The true revelation came when we were finally alone. The entourage had dispersed to handle the press and manage the public narrative of the defeat. Ali requested a moment with just me, a request so unexpected that even Bundini didn't object. When the door closed, leaving just 2 former adversaries, Ali's demeanor changed. Joe, he said with surprising lucidity, I'm scared. The admission froze me in place. Muhammad Ali, who had stood against governments, who had sacrificed prime years of his career for his principles, who had taunted the most dangerous men on the planet, was admitting fear. My mind ain't right, he continued. Been slipping for months. Forget things. Hands shake when I'm just sitting quiet. He was describing symptoms that would later become painfully familiar to the world, but in 1980, they were just mysterious betrayals of his once perfect body. I sat beside him, unsure how to comfort a man I'd spent years wanting to destroy. You got nothing left to prove, I offered. You showed the world everything already. He shook his head slowly. That's not what scares me, Joe. I ain't afraid of being finished. I'm afraid of what comes next. His words were prophetic. The boxing legends who had seemed immortal in the ring often faced the cruelest fates in retirement. We discussed what few fighters ever acknowledge, the cost of our chosen profession, the pieces of ourselves left behind in blood-soaked rings across the world. The price was worth it, he said finally. Even knowing this ending, I'd do it all again. I nodded, understanding completely. For men like us, the glory was always worth the cost. Before leaving, Ali made me promise something that would haunt me for decades. Don't tell them how bad it really is, Smoke. Let them remember me strong. I gave him my word, a promise I kept until today. The boxing world never knew how vulnerable he was that night, how aware he already was of his declining health, how Holmes had actually pulled punches in the final rounds, out of respect for his former mentor. Some truths are too painful for legends to bear. What happened in the years that followed only confirmed what we both suspected that night. Ali fought once more, a shameful bout against Trevor Berbick that he lost decisively. His Parkinson's diagnosis became public. The quickest hands and fastest feet in heavyweight history betrayed him completely, leaving him trembling and slow. Yet through it all, he maintained a dignity that transcended his physical limitations. The Louisville Lip who could once recite poetic predictions of his opponent's demise found new eloquence in silence. His eyes, those expressive windows that had telegraphed everything from playful mischief to ruthless determination, now conveyed a quiet wisdom that commanded even greater respect. Our paths crossed occasionally in retirement. At a boxing charity event in 1985, I watched him struggle to light the ceremonial torch, his once lightning hands now trembling uncontrollably. The crowd held its collective breath, willing their hero to complete this simple task that had become monumentally difficult. When he finally succeeded, the arena erupted in a roar louder than any I'd heard for an actual fight. I caught his eye across the platform and saw something remarkable. Not defeat, not resignation, but the same indomitable spirit that had carried him through the rumble in the jungle and the thriller in Manila. His body had surrendered, but Muhammad Ali's essential self remained unconquered. The last time I saw him before his death was at the Olympic opening ceremony in Atlanta, 1996. The boxing world watched with tears as he lit the Olympic flame, his entire body shaking with the effort. What the viewers at home didn't see was what happened backstage. Before taking the torch, Ali spotted me in the preparation area. With tremendous effort, he made his way over. Speech had largely abandoned him by then, but he extended his trembling hand toward me. As our hands met, the same hands that had once delivered punishment to each other across 21 brutal rounds in Manila, he pulled me into an embrace. No words were necessary. In that moment, I understood completely what he had meant in the dressing room 16 years earlier. The rivalry, the fights, the animosity, they were just chapters in a larger story about two men who had defined each other. The boxing truth that nobody talks about is that fighters never truly retire. The punches follow us into old age, echoing in damaged neural pathways and arthritic joints. The crowds fade away, the millions dwindle, but the consequences remain. Ali bore his burden with unmatched grace. He transformed from the most divisive figure in sports to a universal symbol of courage and conviction. Those of us who knew him in his prime sometimes struggled to reconcile the fiery, provocative champion with the gentle, trembling ambassador he became. But those who were in the dressing room that night after the Holmes fight understood the link between these two versions of the man. It was always about dignity, whether asserting it defiantly in his prime or maintaining it silently in his decline. As I look back now on our intertwined careers, I realize what a gift it was to have been Muhammad Ali's greatest rival. He made me better than I could have been without him. We brought out each other's greatness through our mutual determination to prevail. That night in Las Vegas, when I helped him from the ring after the Holmes defeat, was when I finally understood the truth about our relationship. We weren't enemies. We were necessary counterweights, keeping each other balanced and driven. The boxing rivalry that defined our careers was actually a partnership of sorts, each pushing the other toward a greatness neither could have achieved alone. The untold boxing story of that night isn't just about Ali's devastating defeat or the early signs of his illness. It's about how the boundaries between adversaries can dissolve in moments of truth. It's about how the boxing world creates artificial enemies out of men who have more in common than different. Holmes understood this when he held back in those final rounds. I understood it when I entered Ali's dressing room not to gloat, but to support. And Ali, in his bruised wisdom, had understood it all along. Boxing history will remember the Ali-Holmes fight as the sad end of an era, the fight that should never have happened. The record books show a technical knockout in 10 rounds, but what happened after the final bell reveals more about the sport's greatest champion than any of his victories. In defeat, Muhammad Ali showed a quiet courage that made his in-ring bravado seem almost childish by comparison. He faced the beginning of the end with the same unflinching resolve he had once faced Sonny Liston, George Foreman, and yes, me. What really happened in the ring after Muhammad Ali lost to Larry Holmes was the first page of the final chapter in boxing's greatest story. It was the moment when the legend began transitioning into the legacy. We who were there saw the man behind the myth, vulnerable yet undiminished in his essential greatness. Ali once said, "The man who views the world at 50 the same as he did at 20 has wasted 30 years of his life." In that dressing room, I witnessed a man who had not wasted a single moment, who had evolved from a controversial champion to a wounded warrior, to a sage accepting the inevitable tide of time. As Ali's former rival, I've carried these memories for decades, honoring my promise to let the world remember him as strong. But with his passing, I believe the complete truth serves his legacy better than protective silence. The boxing world should know that even in his darkest professional moment, Muhammad Ali showed the character that made him truly the greatest. Not because he was unbeatable, Holmes proved he wasn't. Not because he was perfect. His life contained contradictions and mistakes like any other. He was the greatest because when the lights dimmed and the crowds disappeared, when his magnificent body failed him and his famous voice quieted, the essential quality of the man remained undiminished. His courage never wavered, whether facing me in the ring or facing mortality in that quiet dressing room. I, Joe Frazier, his fiercest rival, his reluctant friend, can finally tell the world what I whispered to him as we parted ways that night in 1980. "You'll always be the champion, Muhammad. Always." In the end, it wasn't the belts or the victories or even the cultural impact that made him the greatest. It was his humanity, magnificent in its complexity, inspiring in its resilience, and ultimately, touchingly familiar to anyone who has faced defeat with dignity. The boxing history books will forever record our rivalry, but they can never capture the respect that flowed between two warriors who gave everything to their craft and to each other. If you've made it this far and felt every word, don't leave without subscribing and commenting where you're watching from. If this truly touched you, give back, comment, subscribe, join this family with me until the next video.